People have been dreaming about space exploration for a long time. Of course, today there is not as much excitement around this topic as there was during the space race. But, despite this, in recent years we often hear various statements about intentions to colonize other planets, because in the near future we are promised flights to Mars. And on the background of all this, I would like to talk about the colonization of space in general, namely to understand why people in principle try to find a home outside of their native planet. What problems are to be solved in this regard, and why colonization of space has the potential to make us different from each other in the end. First, it is necessary to understand why and under what circumstances people may need to leave their place of residence in the first place. And there are several reasons for this. One of them is the increase in the number of people on our planet. Yes, there is enough space on Earth for now, but in the future it is very likely that there may come a point at which it does run out. As a result, a number of people simply will need to leave the globe, and the problem of overpopulation is not only in the lack of territory. The fact is that the resources of our planet are also not infinite, and in a situation, if people suddenly do not think of a way to make them fully renewable, then to survive it will still have to look for some other worlds. Of course, in this matter all depends on the level of technological development, because the extraction of resources, probably, can be organized without human participation in this process. Who knows, maybe progress will come to the point that the robots of the future will be able to extract all necessary outside the Earth and then deliver to our planet. But even with this optimistic prognosis, there are still reasons to settle in the vastness of space. For example, there is a possibility that if we sit on one planet, then eventually we can wait for some global disaster, which, for example, would completely destroy the globe, and with it our entire species. And in such a situation, resettlement in space will greatly increase humanity's chances of avoiding extinction. In addition, we should not forget about the banal attraction of people to the unknown. In general, someday we simply will become too little, no matter what, territory, resources, or knowledge, any of which will necessarily cause us to rush outside our home planet in an attempt to find a new home. What might a space colony look like? To begin with, mankind has several options for how life in space might be arranged in the future. Colonies can either be on a suitable planet, a satellite or an asteroid, or directly in space, for example in the orbit of a celestial body, or in one of the so-called Lagrangian points. Lagrange points are special places in space around two celestial bodies, such as the Earth and the Moon or the Earth and the Sun, in which the space colony, balanced by gravity from these two objects and centrifugal force, would remain stationary relative to them. There are 5 such points in each of such systems, and a space settlement could be located in one of them. Such settlements themselves could be, for example, the so-called space cities of bagels. The name, of course, funny, but it reflects the principle of such structures. The idea was that all such cities, or parts of them designed for human habitation, would have a ring shape, rotating around its axis, which would create an artificial force of gravity on its inner surface. Ideally, they would also have an artificial ecosystem, and sunlight would be directed to the living areas by mirrors placed in a special way. According to the author's plans, such cities could house anywhere from 10,000 to 140,000 people. But such constructions are not feasible today. The most realistic option in our time is to build a space base on some less suitable for life planets, for example on Mars, which in the near future, and going to do the various supporters of the colonization of space. What are the problems to be solved? As we all know, You cannot just fly away to the nearest planet and build a base for living there. In order to make this possible, many problems must first be solved, and one of the main problems is the presence of high levels of radiation in space. It comes mainly from two sources. The main part of it comes from cosmic rays, which occur, for example, during supernova explosions or similar events in various galaxies, and the second cause is powerful solar flares and coronal emissions, which also increase the general level of radiation in interplanetary space. So in low Earth orbit, i.e. at that altitude where the ISS is and where all human space flights are conducted, we are protected from this radiation, although not completely, but by the magnetic field of our planet, while people on the ground themselves are helped by the atmosphere, among other things. But if we take Mars as an example, its magnetic field is much weaker than that of the Earth, which, together with the rarefied atmosphere, contributes to the fact that its surface already reaches a much larger amount of ionizing radiation, and the fact that it still needs to fly to Mars, means that for a long time the colonists will have to be in a space where the magnetic field will not protect them at all. And in such an environment, depending on the number of solar flares, they will receive, on average, a radiation dose equal to 700 millisieverts per year of flight, which is almost the maximum permitted radiation dose for an astronaut during his entire career. By comparison, on the ground you would only be exposed to 2 whole and 4/10 millisieverts over the same period of time. So the difference is not small, and if people don't find a solution to this problem, it will at least lead to an increased risk of cognitive impairment, colon cancer, autonomic nervous system malfunction, and who knows what else, which will significantly aggravate the colonization of space. Another obstacle to a new home is weightlessness. For example, the leg and back muscles, normally used to counteract gravity, atrophy and lose their strength. In addition, cardiac activity slows down, arrhythmia occurs, and oxygen consumption decreases. In order to compensate at least somehow for these negative effects, it is necessary to constantly perform exercises on simulators. Also, in the absence of gravity, the body begins to lose fluid more actively. As a result, blood volume can decrease by almost a quarter, and to cope with this, and astronauts need to drink at least 3 liters of fluid per day. Another unpleasant effect is a decrease in the amount of calcium in the bones, which eventually leads to their fragility, and the process of recovery to a normal state after 8 months of flight may take up to 2 years. And even this is not the end of the obstacles, because in addition to weightlessness and radiation, the participants of the flight can expect various psychological problems. The first of the colonists will most likely have to live in a small confined space, and this can lead to all sorts of difficulties in the interaction between team members, as well as cognitive and behavioral disorders. After all, they will still have to change the usual conditions of life on Earth, but much worse. And so it is not a fact that even well-prepared participants of colonization will be able to normally endure the hardships of extraterrestrial life. In addition, we should not forget about the lack of adequate medical care in the new settlement, including the unpredictable effect of drugs due to long-term storage in the framework of the same weightlessness and radiation. How will colonization change people? Situations: if we ever do manage to master space well enough, build not one but many colonies, settle on different planets and space cities, then theoretically it may lead to the fact that over time people will begin to differ from each other. First, cultural changes. Obviously people living on different planets will have different cultures, languages, governments, political institutions, religions, technologies, rituals, norms, worldviews, and so on. The differences can become too much. And if even on Earth people have been in constant conflict throughout our history, we can only speculate how disconnected we may become after space exploration. But that's not the most interesting thing that could happen to us. The fact is that each potentially habitable planet has its own unique physical conditions. If by some miracle we fail to recreate in all of our colonies an environment identical to Earth's, sooner or later it can lead to the fact that our species will change. And everywhere in different ways. After all, due to evolution, there will gradually be more and more people who are most adapted to the conditions of a certain planet or space city. Among other things, a major role in this process may be played not only by how the environment in the places where we will live will affect us. Well, how we will try to change ourselves, because it is likely that people, wishing to adapt to life in an unfamiliar environment, will resort to the use of technology to modify and strengthen their bodies. And eventually, after a considerable amount of time, all these factors could theoretically make us creatures. Not at all alike, with different intellectual capacities, emotional perceptions, longevity, having nothing in common, neither physically nor culturally. All of this is likely to lead to many problems. It is not certain that with such differences we will ever be able to get along with each other, but whatever the case, this is a matter for the distant future. Well, for now, humanity will have to concentrate on solving the problems that stand in the way of our first extraterrestrial colony.